Hello and welcome back to my channel where today we're going to see how the Bundesliga fares in terms of the performance buzz analysis and the players within it. But before I do get into the video, you can see again the data is from Index Gain and a few other bits that I've come up with. And if you do enjoy this video at any point, please drop a like down below and subscribe if you haven't already. So with that, we'll get straight into it. So looking at the Bundesliga standings, we can see there are three groups within the table. So we have the top five with 10 points separating fifth and sixth. And we also have the bottom three at a little bit of a gap between 15th and 16th. And I believe this will be how it kind of finishes. Bremen may beat Dusseldorf there to the 16th spot and may save themselves in the relegation playoff. But I do expect Bayern to, finish out the league on top, as much as I hope it does remain competitive between Dortmund and Bayern, but I do think Bayern's squad and strength in depth will see them through. So within the Bundesliga matches, we can see there are 58 performance buzz winners, and we can see the breakdowns there on the screen with the forwards, midfielders and defenders. And if we are to move it on to looking at the top 10 performance buzz winners ranked by number of wins, what's interesting to see is that there are fairly younger players within this list, such as Sancho, Hakimi, Skov, Werner, and Kimmich, amongst some of the more older players and established players. But nonetheless, a lot of very decent PB maximum scores there. All of them over their average positional winning scores, and a decent amount of PB earnings there on the screen in which you can see. But it's not surprising to see Kimmich or Lewandowski out on top here playing for Bayern Munich, since they are obviously out in front in the top of the Bundesliga. So next on screen you can see the average winning PB scores for each position and each match type there, and the differences between the Bundesliga and the average winning PB scores overall. And if you want to take a closer look, you may want to pause the video and have a look at these differences. However, here are the differences between the Bundesliga and the overall, and we can see there that the defensive average winning PB scores are lower and much lower on a silver day than the overall winning scores. However, they are consistently higher within the forwards, so these players obviously contributing, such as Werner and Lewandowski, much higher than the average, particularly there on the gold day, 15 points higher on average. May suggest that the Bundesliga, for the forwards, are scoring more goals, racking up more points. Maybe they're just involved in the play a little bit more, and may come down to, is there a bigger difference between the top teams and the bottom teams there? So we obviously said earlier, between the gap between 5th and 6th, the gap between 1st and 17th, 18th is obviously extremely big, with the team Paderborn at the bottom, a long way behind Bayern Munich obviously at the top. Also taking a brief look at the top 10 PB averages between the players within the Bundesliga, we can see here that it's heavily dominated by Bayern Munich players, as on average they're going to dominate most teams rather than the others. So there we can see 7 out of the 10 players within the top 10 averages playing for Bayern Munich, with the exceptions of Kostic there at Frankfurt, a very key player for them. Hakimi there at Dortmund, doing very well this season at Dortmund, despite being on loan obviously from Real Madrid. And there Upachenko at number 10, having a very good season, and obviously got transfer links towards the Premier League. And who knows where he'll end up in the future, but I'm sure he'll have a bright future. But we can obviously see some familiar names with Kimmich, Thiago, Pavard coming into the Bayern Munich this season, Lewandowski, Gnabry hitting some impressive peaks this season. And moving on to, speaking of peaks and the PB maximums, we can see here the top 10 maximums. And it's not quite as dominated by Bayern Munich, but we can obviously see a few players in there that we recognise and who they've scored these maximums against. So taking in consideration club matches only and removing the international matches, Gnabry there against Tottenham, we obviously all remember that night in his 4 goals. Timo Werner's 3-7-3 against Mainz was very impressive. I believe he also had a couple of assists within that performance too. And we've even got A few players there that we may not recognise so much, such as Sebastian Andersson for Cologne. I think he scored a hat trick in that game, so they're a very impressive score down to his goal scoring. But it's also interesting to see here that these players are all rather attacking, further forward players. With the exception of perhaps Hakimi, however, scored his 280 playing more further forward, perhaps on the wing, scoring 2 goals there versus Inter Milan in the Champions League this season in a very, very impressive display. So this table here demonstrates each team separated by their position type and the number of times they have posted a score over the average winning score. So obviously, for example, Lewandowski is the highest scoring forward, hitting 4 times over the average winning score for Bayern Munich. And Thiago obviously doing the same within midfield for Bayern Munich also. Where there are gaps is where we can see that no one within that team and that position has scored over the average winning score of that position. So, for example, there are some teams here, Paderborn, for example, or maybe Werder Bremen, obviously not having such a successful season this year, haven't had anyone within their squad score over the average winning scores. So that may steer your research and decide who you want to buy, particularly when you're looking at the PB holes within each leagues. So if you want to take a closer look, it may be worth pausing just to see who comes out on top, but also something to consider in your own research. So the final table here is for PB wins for teams and PB wins in which teams have played against them. So for example, Bayern Munich obviously having 10 PB wins within the Bundesliga matches this season, and Paderborn obviously having PB wins 9 times against them. So it could be Bayern Munich versus Paderborn or Leipzig versus Paderborn, for example. And something that may be worth taking into consideration is the single match days, in where one team could be taking up 3 spots in the teams for and the teams against, which may be why teams such as Schalke and Hoffenheim are doing so well, and maybe ahead of Dortmund, for example, that have had less single match days. But still, there seems to be quite a strong correlation between just the stronger teams being up there for the higher number of PB teams number of PB wins, for example, and the teams towards the bottom. So they're Paderborn really struggling at the bottom, Bremen this season also really struggling with Dusseldorf. And they're towards the higher end of the teams against. So that's quite expected when we break things down like that and just look things in a different way as we usually would, and we're able to spot some trends going into our research, and it may help you fine tune your picks for PB, as we said earlier. And with that concludes the video we have today on the Bundesliga. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have, obviously drop a like down below, subscribe if you want to see future content, and obviously I'll be going to be covering the other leagues, the La Liga, League One and Serie A coming up, so keep an eye out for those. And in the meantime, take care, and I'll catch you all next time.